listening to Transformation in Trials. Welcome to Transformation in Trials. This is a podcast exploring all things transformational in clinical trials. Nothing is off limits on the show, and we will have guests from the whole spectrum of the clinical trials community. And we're your hosts, Ivana and Sam.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Transformation in Trials. And today, Ivana and I are delighted to be joined by Dr. Daniel Fox. Daniel is the founder and CEO of the Clinical Research Payment Network, and we're really pleased to have him on the show today. Hi, Daniel. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Sam. Thanks for having me here.
Awesome. Now, today's episode is going to be all about the topic of talk down tech in clinical trials. And I think all of our audience members are going to be really intrigued about what this topic is all about. But before we get into that, to set the stage, maybe, Daniel, you could talk to us about the current dynamic between sponsors, CROs, and sites in clinical trials, and what's working and what isn't working.
Sure. It's a very interesting dynamic, Sam. Ironically, sites do work for sponsors and CROs. So sponsors and CROs, kind of like in a healthcare world, are patients. If we are doctors, they come to us seeking services. They are our patients, right? So that's, in a business model, that's kind of how it's supposed to work. For some way, shape, or form, it has morphed into something a little bit different. Imagine a world where patients come to a doctor's office and tell you how to take care of them, tell you what medications to give, tell you what stethoscope to use, what X-ray machine to use. Quite work like that in healthcare. And I think that the merge between industry and productivity and development of tech trying to work its way into healthcare has actually created this really weird relationship. On top of that, these sponsors and CROs tend to be conscious of almost like vendor utilization. Everything has to have purpose. Everything has to be efficient. Everything is expendable. And so as a result, this weird dynamic that you have is a service provider who is integrating with its consumer, who the consumer believes that it can control everything. And on top of that, that consumer believes that if it cannot control everything, it can simply plug and play, pull one thing out and replace it back in. So what you are seeing is this weird service provider business model where the people providing the services are actually treated as expendable subservience. And these strange global superpowers believe that it's just, if it doesn't work, just move on to the next one. So in essence, from a site's perspective and from everything that I've experienced in the industry, it's turning into a pretty toxic environment. You have people on the front lines serving our patients who are being treated in ways that are not necessarily appropriate.
That's a fascinating explanation, Daniel, and a really clear one at that. Why do you think there is this dynamic then? To your description a second ago, if I'm a patient as the consumer and I go in to the doctor's surgery and act in that way, then it would be highly inappropriate, right? What's your views on what's caused this dynamic?
I think that you'll find, especially in our society, anyone who is more well-traveled tends to have a higher knowledge and or awareness of what is happening. To put it into that analogy with the patient and the doctor, what would happen if that patient traveled to doctors' offices from around the world? So they went to hundreds of doctors' offices. And therefore, as a result, with this expanded experience across the industry, they would feel as though they know more than the doctor that they're working with. Most of the time in business models, globalization turns into awareness and education that localized community centers and industries don't necessarily have. And so I think that maybe that might be the difference that you're seeing. In other words, sponsors and CROs have direct access to hundreds of sites across the world, and therefore they feel as though they have a higher experience level than the people that they are working with at the local site level.
We have listeners from all variety of different backgrounds, some involved in clinical trials intimately, some not so at all. So in as simple words as possible, what is talk-down tech?
Talk-down tech is essentially just that. It is when sponsors and CROs say that it is okay for a site to use something. We have vetted this technology. We give you permission to utilize this technology for the services we are subcontracting you out as independent contractors to utilize. In other words, we're telling you how to do your job with services and software that we don't necessarily have the right to tell you to use.
And how does that how is that perceived at the site level? That these big global corporations are coming and dictating how the sites should do their jobs?
I think that you'll see that with the history of what's going on here. Top-down tech has been happening for a while, and many times this top-down tech does not succeed. When global entities try to, quote, standardize the practices across sites throughout the world, who are all independent companies and organizations who don't necessarily have the capacity to work within the same protocols, it just doesn't work. As a result, the sites perceive, we try. Of course, sometimes it actually gets to the point where if you don't utilize this top-down tech, you don't get the trial. Sites have to adapt. They have to try to utilize it. But it's not working. It's not working at all. On a legal level, it doesn't, people aren't supposed to do that. As independent contractors, sites should have the right and authority to utilize the software, the tools, whatever they need to get the job done. It's not the sponsor's right legally to tell sites how to do their job as independent contractors.
And are we seeing that sites are taking more ownership for their own processes and their own technologies?
You are seeing an evolution right now of tech. There are a lot of what we call site-facing tech solutions that are occurring right now. Solutions that are listening to sites, developing it with the voice of the sites, and giving sites the choice and the option to utilize it. It's happening right now. Even just yesterday, I saw on LinkedIn, there's a certain CTMS that's creating a technology platform where it's offering sites technology to use. So in other words, you're seeing it right now in front of our eyes, the site-centric movement where sites are making the selections, the choices, and they're starting to standardize that. Not as talk-down tech, but more, I guess, talk-up tech. It's turning into, instead of a sponsor saying, we approve, we give you permission to use this tech, you're seeing sites go to sponsors saying, these are all the tech options that we offer in our systems, in our operations. So
that's a game changer, definitely. I've also recently become aware of the term of site centricity. We often talk about patient centricity, but that's actually really hard for a sponsor to do. Maybe you can talk to us more about the evolution of the focus of the site itself.
Mm-hmm. I heard someone tell me yesterday, I promoted site centricity before it was cool. But you are exactly right. Let's think of it this way. When we are doing research right now, let's say we're developing a drug, right? Let's think about who in this industry is going to promote that drug after it's approved. Say 20 years from now, the drug is approved. Who is going to be left in the system to promote it? It's not going to be the sponsor. They're going to move on to the next thing. It's not going to be the CRO. Honestly, it's not even going to be the site, and it's not going to be the patient. Patient won't even know about it. The one key factor in our future is going to be the physician. The physician is going to be the only factor in the clinical research equation that remains within patient care 20 years from now after we've done our job. The physician is connected directly to the site. The sites are here to serve our physicians. Therefore, if we want to truly advance healthcare, we need to centralize our efforts around serving that physician and making sure they have what they need, not only to complete their job and to finish this research, but also to keep them interested in the future of healthcare. Therefore, if we focus on the site, if we give the site everything that they need, and they can empower that physician to do their job, then we will truly advance research, not only with what we're doing now. The drugs that we're doing now will, they're either going to be approved or they won't be approved. But we're looking at it in the long run, in the long haul, when we are there for that physician. That's site centricity. Focus on the site so you can empower the physician and truly advance medicine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. From what I'm hearing, it's not so much about any resistance to standardization of technology. It's more about that technology that we, in general, use across our industry, that it also works for the site.
You are absolutely right. You have to have flexible choices in technology to accommodate the different kinds of sites. You have the private sites of physicians who are focused on care. You've got the universities with a lot of protocols and red tape to get through. If you're going to try to standardize, the only way that you can apply that is to apply flexibility and interchangeability in communication between your institutions. So it's going to take a lot of flexibility. And the sponsor side isn't necessarily known to be flexible. Most of the time, it's this is what we will do, or if you don't like it, leave. Or if you don't do what we want, then we don't want to work with you. And look and see how that's going. Ask them how much money they're spending now on research compared to before. And ask them how their patient enrollment is going. Ask them how much money this industry is planned to be worth by 2030. It's not working.
Yeah.
It's going to take some compromise. And by compromise, I don't mean compromise your qualities. It's going to take some flexibility so that you can be able to work with a diverse level of professionals.
When you've talked to sponsors about these challenges, Daniel, what's their reaction been to what you're saying?
Most of the time, there's of course initially a level of resistance. Like I said, as a culture, sponsors tend to view sites as expendable. So if you got a squeaky wheel, you just replace it. And then once they realize that the concerns are not out of malice, they're actually out of concern to help empower them, they start to realize, well, maybe we see what he's talking about. If we can start to treat him like a professional colleague instead of like a subservient, then we would actually be able to strengthen our processes. We'd be able to do this stronger, faster. We'd be able to listen and work with them. It's 50-50 right now. A lot of the big global sponsors who, we're just little ants in their cog, they're fine, just kind of move on to the next level. But the flexible ones, the innovative ones, the ones that are really trying to change this industry, they're coming around. They're starting to realize, okay, this is how we would get things done. And wouldn't you know it, those same successful companies that do all of this, they get bought out by the big global guys. So one way or the other, we're going to help them.
I see. I think the saying "money talks" is always quite valid in our industry. So not sure if there's a way of what you're trying to evangelize can try and hook into that concept of money talks and make the big guys see that, hey, if you listen to us, then there is an impact from a financial standpoint too.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. It's if you were to streamline these efficiencies, like if I were to go to a sponsor right now, even the big global guys, and I said, if we can apply these processes, your trials will be complete in a 60% faster moment. You can reduce your time by 60%. And then their eyebrows perk up and I'm listening. Well, okay, this is why. If you want to enroll patients faster, if you want to do it with fewer resources, if you want to be a better company, if you want to save literally billions of dollars, listen to the people you're signing contracts with. Let them do their job. Let them do what they know best. That's why you're signing a contract with them.
And Daniel, could you tell us more about the PACT score?
Yes, the PACT score is doing quite well. The PACT score is my company's attempt at developing accountability in the industry. PACT stands for Promises, Access, Choice, and Trust. It is the development of about 50 questions that can be answered to understand the business behaviors of the clinical research professionals, sites, CROs. How are they doing on their payment schedules? How often do they breach contract? How are they on communicating? What about their promises? Do they give you options and choices to be the professionals that you need to be to deliver them the data that they require? Or, do they send you money 18 months after it's due, even while you're expected to continue work? Do they expect you to perform services without a contract just because they're big and you're not? There are so many things that happen on the clinical site level that are frankly unethical and unprofessional, even illegal. And so the PACT score is an opportunity for clinical sites to anonymously tell their story. Let CRPN normalize and collect these data and to tell the story to the industry. Who is the best and who's not so great and why?
And how do you think that sponsors could make it more attractive for sites to participate in trials?
Well, there's PACT right there. So if you ever want to know what a site wants, then look at the PACT score. Look at what we are measuring. Keep your promises. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. Provide the access that sites need for the work that they do. This includes, not requiring a withholding. Sites can't be zero interest banks for sponsors. We need the money to do the work. Choice. Let them be the professionals that they want to be. Let them utilize the services that are they're good for their sites. And then finally, trust. Trust is a multiplier. It is a factor of everything else. Because if you accomplish promises, access, and choice, and you're really good at it, you're going to multiply the relationship with a development of trust.
So if I've got this right then, Daniel, if you're a clinical research site and you're considering working with a clinical trial sponsor, you could in theory say, hey, Mr. Sponsor, what's your PACT score? And I want to use that in consideration as to whether I want to actually engage in this project or not.
It actually goes directly there. So what my company does is they actually sell PACT reports. So if you were to go to my company and you say, I want to buy a PACT report and then you issue an NCT number from clinicaltrials.gov, the company, the Clinical Research Payment Network, CRPN, will pull from its database and provide to you a PACT report. And that should drive your negotiations. You have a PACT report that's very good. Therefore, it's low risk and we can accept lower negotiated rates because you're a good sponsor. There you go. You are being rewarded for being a good sponsor. Or your PACT report is within the 25th percentile of the industry. You are not very good to work with. I either don't want to award you a slot in my site, or it's going to cost you a lot of money because you are very expensive to do work with.
Interesting. So naturally, I could see sites would want to understand the PACT score of a given sponsor. And I guess sponsors want to know what score they've got to. Yeah.
Yes, they do. And it's going both ways. Sometimes sponsors are asking for PACT scores and PACT reports so they can be better sponsors, where it's like almost like a gap analysis. This is how we are perceived by sites. This needs to change so that we can be better in the industry. And that is happening right now.
What role do CROs play here? Because I know that a lot of CROs, they also recruit sites on behalf of sponsors.
Yep. So CROs are assessed with PACT. They are assessed parallel to sponsors. And the theory is if a sponsor signs with a CRO, that sponsor is just as responsible as the CRO. If they, they are business partners, the ink is dry between the two of them, and therefore they are both assessed like that. Now, I have industry scores for both CROs and sponsors. So there are independent scores from each, and there are dependent scores.
What about technology, Daniel? Would you extend it as far as like tech platforms? Or is that not really kind of what you're thinking about here?
That's not quite where I was going for. I mean, you can use accountability and assessments, and a lot of times the tech platforms, they're being assessed in many different ways as it is, maybe not from a site level. But you are absolutely right. That could be a direction to go. I mean, when it comes to assessments, you could hold accountability in any kind of a business model. It's just a matter of how you're going to shape it.
Yeah, I mean, having worked for a number of tech vendors, if PACT became kind of ubiquitous across the industry as a score that sites were interested in and rated, then to be able to say, hey, I have a PACT score of, 92.4 out of 100, that would be very attractive.
Mm-hmm. You are right. And PACT is actually gaining some steam. I'm getting collaborators who are willing to integrate PACT into some of their software tech. So there are certain site-facing software techs to help with feasibility startups and other opportunities where they said you can apply PACT to the NCT numbers and then it would be searchable. So sites, as they're viewing this tech, as they're viewing these software platforms, they can see the PACT score right next to every trial. So it will impact what trials they select for their sites.
Interesting. So you've alluded to some of the positive reaction to PACT. What about negatives? Surely you've had some pushback from different quarters.
My favorite one was if you start applying a metric and a score to these pharmaceutical companies, they will run you out of town. That was the exact words. They're going to run you out of town. It's like, well, maybe if you're negative about it, but if you try to put a positive spin on it, it's fine. The favorite thing this goes back to favorite, but I always tell sponsors it's like wearing a wearable biometric world where, you collect heart rate and blood pressure and all of these things in your body. Sometimes you don't like the results. They're not pleasant to look at because it makes you realize the truth, but that's the motivation that you need to be better. And, to all of the haters out there in the world, it's like this is the age of data. And if you don't want this, there's probably a really bad reason why you don't want this. And it's because you're not doing your job.
How does PACT, because I would imagine if I had a low PACT score, for example, I'd want to dive into that and investigate what made me a low PACT score. Is it very clearly kind of outlined how that score was derived, so it can be it can face scrutiny, if you like?
Yes, it is derived. Is derived through different levels of analysis. The actual calculation of PACT is proprietary, so I don't release that part. But if, let's say a sponsor comes to me and says, we have a low PACT score, what the heck's going on? I can provide a deeper dive. I can say, these are the number of people that reported. This is what they said. These are the low points. These are the high points. We can do a PACT gap analysis so they can understand what sites are saying about them. To protect the sites, whoever reports the PACT, it's confidential. They're completely validated so that we know that the data are true. And what I can provide them is exactly what they would need to improve. The idea of PACT is not to provide a permanent punishment. Is to encourage people to be better.
So the score can change, right?
Yes.
You on day one, you could have this PAT score. You make the improvements suggested, and
yes,
in day whatever, your PAT score could have changed.
Yes. So PAC scores expire within 5 years of submissions. So your PAC scores can improve, and you're allowed to submit PAC scores, or each site is allowed to submit a PAC score every 6 months for the same trial, which means that if you improve, you can not only increase your scores coming in on the front end, but on the back end, the bad scores will expire, as will the good scores. So you have to just maintain your behavior.
This might be a good segue into learning a bit more about what brought you into having a deep understanding of this topic, Daniel, and a bit about your background.
Yeah, I am a translational scientist through and through. I started my career growing chlamydia, and I moved on to auditory studies with chinchillas and guinea pigs and rats. And I moved to soldiers and clinical trials where we audited for hearing studies. I moved from the academic world all the way over to the small biotech world, where I wrote patents, learned chain of custody, did a lot of the project management, program management. From small biotech and patents, I moved all the way back over to global manufacturing, where I worked with some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world to help to develop their products and manufacture them. I went back to small but semi-large biotech so that we could help to develop products. And then finally, after my national tour, I went from both coasts, from the Midwest to both coasts, and now I'm back in the Midwest, where I'm on the forefront with the patients. I'm on the front lines. We serve the patients in clinical studies. So as a result, I know how this industry should work on the other side, on the biotech side. I know what they're doing, the stresses they're having, and I have a complete understanding of where they're coming from. And there's this really weird gap between biotech and clinical research, a really big and inappropriate gap. Contracts are breached. There's a lot of things that are happening that would never fly in biotech, but for some reason, it's an industry standard in clinical research. So
can you allude to any more, or would you rather not comment?
It's frankly inappropriate how the contracts are processed, the professional dynamics in clinical research and sites. A lot of people point to the CROs. Sometimes I just think that people don't know what the heck they're doing. They don't know how things are supposed to be, and therefore they kind of just accept what they're given. So once you are aware of how things should be, then you really start realizing how bad things are in the clinical site level.
I see. And Clinical Research Payment Network, then, tell us a bit more about that organization that you founded and you're CEO of.
Yep. So as a result of my experience and my observations in the clinical site world, I decided to start a company to do something about it. I realized that I am one of the few out there on the site level who either know how things should be or who are either willing to say something about it. There's a lot of fear to speak up on the site level because of what they consider to be a dependability on sponsors and CROs. If we speak up, they just won't work with us anymore, and we don't want to compromise that for our business. That's not how this works. So I decided to start a national network. If someone wants to be mad, they can be mad at me, and I can protect the sites that I'm working for. So the Clinical Research Payment Network aligns the financial processes of research with that of healthcare. One thing to consider, and one thing that I don't think many people really think about, is the size of healthcare as far as a marketplace versus the size of research. Healthcare is literally valued within the trillions of dollars, right? Healthcare is huge. Research might be valued within the billions of dollars, far smaller than healthcare. And so as a result, why do we as research think that it's even acceptable to approach healthcare facilities and expect them to model financial businesses off of our fixed contracts, off of our systems, when that is not how healthcare works at all?
I think that might be a perfect segue to the final question that we always ask our guests on the show. And that is, if we gave you a magic wand and you could wave it and change one thing in our industry, what would that be?
I had to think about this a lot because there's more than one thing. I think the most important thing that I would want to change right now is I would want to shift that focus back to what everyone is saying, back to the patient, back to the site. I find it very ironic that we as an industry are preaching patient first. Patients are important. This is very important. But as an industry and as a business model, we somehow, some way make that frontline patient-facing position in this business the bottom of the totem pole. If you look at this industry, people start out on the front lines working with the patients, and then they think that they're climbing this ladder to go up in their career. They get away from the patients. They go into a CRO world. They go into biotech world. They literally get away from the patients as a professional career path, but then they preach that the patients are the most important part of this entire industry. It's pretty hypocritical. And so if we really want to be patient-centric, we should truly value those people who are on the front lines, our physicians, our coordinators, our sites, as the most valuable and highly paid positions in this industry.
I love that reflection. That's what we should be going for as an industry. Well, Daniel, we are getting ready to close this episode. I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy this episode. I've had the pleasure of talking to you. If they want to reach out to you and learn more, how can they get a hold of you?
If they want to reach out, I'm on LinkedIn often. Please just look up Daniel Fox. I'm sure that you'll find this posted. Please feel free to go to www.crpaynet.com. That's crpaynet.com. And just use the contact information. You can reach out to me, and we're pretty responsive. We're here to serve.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Daniel. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.
You're listening to Transformation in Trials. If you have a suggestion for a guest for our show, reach out to Sam Parnell or Ivana Rosendahl on LinkedIn. You can find more episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or in any other player. Remember to subscribe and get the episodes hot off the editor.